Hello, and welcome to STEAM of Consciousness, a program presented by the ARI Podcasting Network and hosted by George Koperna. What is STEAM? STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. During each episode, we will take a few minutes to sit down with professionals in different STEAM-related fields to give them an opportunity to share their story and give their perspectives with the goal of promoting career awareness to potentially interested students, young professionals, and of course, anyone else who shares a fascination with these areas of study. And now, please join us as we tap into the STEAM of Consciousness.
Welcome to STEAM of Consciousness, a presentation of the ARI Podcasting Network. I'm George Koperna, and today we're really pleased to have Caroline Wachtman. She's a development manager with S.T.E.A.M. Welcome, Caroline.
Hi, thank you.
Really happy to have you here. But can you start by telling us what a development manager does for S.T.E.A.M?
Sure. So what I am working on is CCS and CCUS projects for Oxy. And so what I'm doing is a couple of things. My job is to help support the sequestration associated with Stratos, which is a direct air capture project in West Texas. I'm working on a lot of the permitting and operations for that project. In addition to that, there are a number of studies that I'm working on that are within the Permian Basin that are in support of our CCS and CCUS initiatives, and then helping to certify pore space for new projects in the CCUS space.
I mean, that's super interesting. It's pretty broad and wide-ranging. What kind of degrees do you have to qualify you to do this kind of work?
Yep, so I have a Bachelor of Science in Geology and then also a Master of Science in Geology. And so I originally grew up in Virginia. And so, George, I think you said you're living in Virginia now too, but I grew up in a very small town in Virginia, about halfway between Charlottesville and Richmond, and went to College of William and Mary. And that's where I got my undergraduate degree and then graduate school in University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Okay, well, let's tease that out a little bit. So, rural Virginia, what got you interested in geosciences? Was it you fell out of a truck and hit your head on a rock and said, "Hey, rocks are great"? I doubt that's the case, but what was the inciting moment that drove you to geoscience?
Yeah, so I originally wanted to be an archaeologist. And so rural Virginia, or really Virginia in general, has lots of really interesting archaeological sites, both for Native Americans and then also for colonial Americans. And I was really interested, particularly in the Native American part of it, was really interested in pursuing that as a career. I did some internships. Fortunately, when I was in high school, there was a college that was in the town and had a really great archaeology professor there, really charismatic guy. And so that kind of got me interested in pursuing this, for a profession. Went to college, took a year of archaeology classes, and then was really fortunate to do a field camp in Kenya. And during that field camp in Kenya, where we were looking at paleoanthropological sites, so sites of early hominids, I realized this is not what I wanted to do. And so we were sitting in the baking hot sun all day, scraping away millimeter by millimeter of sand and dirt. Meanwhile, the professors and graduate students were sort of fighting over whose hominid fragment was best. And I could look out and see, this vast expanse of rocks. And I said, well, wow, no one's fighting over the rocks. There's plenty of rocks to go around. And so I think at that point I realized geology was going to offer perhaps a more varied and interesting career path with less of the kind of politics that paleoanthropology and archaeology offered. And so it's sort of that concept of red ocean, blue ocean, which I didn't know at the time. There's a book about it, but the idea that you can kind of go into a very crowded space and fight your way to the top, or you can go into a much more open space and kind of reach your potential that way. And so pivoted to geology and found out that there's a really excellent geology program at William & Mary, really strong field component. I loved being outdoors, and so had a great time for the rest of my college career doing a lot of field work and learning how the earth works, which is really exciting.
And so There must have been a little bit of stress on that decision moving. I'm going to change my major. How is that going to work? Um, Once you took that risk, and isn't that really what it's all about? It's about looking at risks and deciding whether that risk is worth taking or not. When did you recognize, oh no, this was right? Was it very soon? Was it a year into it? How did that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty soon after pivoting and starting to take those geology classes that I realized it was a great place to be, in part because there were a lot of really great professors and the community of geologists was great. And the kind of work that we were doing was really interesting. I really like solving problems, and so geology is all about solving problems. And so, or understanding problems is another way to think about it. And so I that appealed to me. And then, like I said, the fieldwork component of it was very appealing to me. Growing up in rural Virginia, I spent most of my time outside when I wasn't in school. And so being able to pursue a profession where I could have more of an opportunity to be outside and explore nature was really attractive. Now, I don't do much of that in my current role and haven't for 20 years, but um, it was certainly something that attracted me to the discipline and then kept me there.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I could be a petroleum engineer. I could work outside and still have a desk to go back to, and that outside part just kind of
Hmm.
goes away after a little while. But
Yeah.
and was it because of the interest in the archaeology, you think, and the outside component of that, and then the field work component that sometimes goes with geology that just kind of made that puzzle come together for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it was partly that. It was partly that the geology department there had really strong professors and a really great community, and we were doing really interesting work. And so, in their undergraduate role, all undergraduates do research. And so, I had an opportunity to work in a lab where I was looking at cosmogenic radionuclides, looking at the age of terraces of the James River. And then, in addition to that, I also had a field project where I was using some of that lab work, but then also doing mapping out in Utah. So spent, weeks out in Utah in the summer, kind of doing a larger scale mapping project to understand a beheaded stream drainage and on the Fish Lake Plateau. So it was that really, sort of interesting problems that I was helping to solve and learning about how the world works and the earth kind of works. And then having a great community there was what really sold it.
And so that transition from the dynamic archaeological professor that kind of got you interested, you had the equal dynamos on the other side of the coin to really help you bridge that.
Correct.
And so, working through your time at William and Mary, you're approaching your graduation, and what was your thought process? Is it, I don't know enough, I want to go back, continue school, or I really like the research, I want to continue to do this, or was it, gosh, I'd like to test the waters of the industry and it might be tepid? Where were you in that continuum?
Yeah, so William and Mary is a liberal arts college, and what's great about liberal arts colleges is they really teach you how to think and how to solve problems, but they're not as great on career development. And so I was approaching graduation and had absolutely no idea what a career would look like in geology, and didn't really have any examples, not having known any professional geologist. The oil industry was certainly not something that was well known in Virginia. So had no idea what a career in geology would look like. But everybody in my family was a teacher. So mother, father, grandmother, step grandparents, literally everybody in the immediate family and even extended family were teachers. And so had kind of assumed, well, I guess I'll go teach. In order to teach, you need a PhD. So let me go to graduate school and see what I can make of it. So that was really more of the decision process. Is I didn't know what I wanted to do, but teaching seemed like a natural career path.
And I can say, just looking at the tools that my daughter had, who's a recent college graduate, when she was making these choices compared to, old no hair guy here when I was graduating in the mid 80s and looking at colleges, I just didn't have a fraction of the tools to be able to inform that.
Yeah,
And and
is
and so did you cast your net pretty broadly? You're thinking maybe teaching at this point. So
mhm.
obviously a graduate school? Was it a pretty broad search, or you kind of had zeroed in already?
Yeah, so I had, like I said, didn't really know what I was going to do, but figured I would need a master's and PhD for it. I ultimately did not get that PhD. I left after a master's, but I had done structural geology for my undergraduate thesis, and so had decided to look for a good structural geology program. And there were a handful of those that were field-based structural geology programs around, and one of those was at University of Wisconsin. And the kind of field projects they had available were in New Zealand, among a couple of other locations. And I said, well, that sounds like a good place to do field work. Let's go.
No, absolutely. And so you still valued, even though it was still a research oriented degree, you still valued that field component, which is great.
Absolutely. Yep.
And how is New Zealand?
New Zealand was great in many ways. It is a great place to do field work because there are lots of rocks, and I was studying the mantle. So I was studying parts of deep earth that have been uplifted along. And there's not many places in the world where you can see that. New Zealand is one. There's some places in Oregon and then Oman and a few other places. But looking at that looking at that gunite and then trying to say something about a history of deformation there. So looking at the orientation of olivine grains and seeing if they've recorded multiple deformation events or if those deformation events had been wiped clean. So it was collecting samples, doing field mapping, and then taking those samples back to the lab where I was analyzing things like mineralogy and the chemistry of those rocks, but then also looking at the lattice preferred orientation or the orientation of those olivine grains to try to say something about strain his rock had experienced. So New Zealand was a great place to do that because they had the right rocks. There was also an ozone hole, or there is an ozone hole over New Zealand, and so it was incredibly harsh environment and real bad sunburn, real bad sunburn. But I was working in a field area that I had to get helicoptered into, so because it was pretty remote and no, sort of no easy pathway to get to with a bunch of camping and field equipment. So got dropped off by a helicopter, was out there two different field seasons for about a couple of months, kind of each time. One assistant, a couple of professors, but yeah, sort of very remote location for a couple of months. Making your own water and camping and having pretty limited food supplies because there's nothing that really lives there, nothing that packing everything in for your camp.
It's it sounds daunting but exciting and exhilarating all at the same time. So fantastic.
Yep.
And so you already said you didn't go on to your PhD. What
Yep.
what changed your thinking in that process over your 2 years of master's work?
Yep. So I was at that time in, I guess, 2004, 2005, um, was it was a time where the petroleum industry was starting to hire a lot more folks, and they came and recruited at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I think many of them do not recruit anymore, or they recruit in a different way. But at that time, they were coming to school, hosting interviews. Um, I had never interviewed for anything. I had had jobs all throughout high school and college, but those had been more, you hand in a resume at the sandwich shop kind of jobs rather than, having a formal
Sure.
interview. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to practice some of those skills or to learn some of those skills. So went and did the interview process and wound up having two offers at the end of that, and then decided that, man, they're going to pay me an awful lot of money. Maybe I should check this out. Clearly different than a teaching career. But I think also at that point I was having doubts about whether teaching was going to be the best option for me. I had, in order to be, I guess there are two things that to work at a university, and I think, it's the same way now and probably even to a higher degree, you're constantly writing grants to try to get funding. And having written some of those, even during the master's program, I realized, gosh, I don't really like that. I don't enjoy that kind of uncertainty about whether am I going to will I have a job next year? Depends on whether I can get funding from the government. That wasn't a comfortable place to be. And so the idea of a little bit more, and it sounds funny now to say that the petroleum industry was more stable, but in some ways felt a little bit more stable than what academia did. So that I think drove me. Plus, it was just something I had no experience in or understanding of, but it sounded like a really interesting new learning opportunity. And so I think those are the things that drove me to the petroleum industry.
And that was a really interesting time, and at least domestically in
Yeah.
oil and gas, because it was the unconventional oil and gas boom was right about that time, and they were in need of folks, and so that's great. And so you went into industry, and how'd you like it? Was it what you expected? Was there, gosh, not as much out in the open air as I hoped, or too much out in the open air?
Yeah, so I got hired by ExxonMobil, moved to Houston, had never lived in a city that was this large. I sort of moved to an area called the Heights, which
Mm.
is, gosh, got probably 250,000 people in it, which is more, I grew up in a town that had about 5,000 and, moved to college and then graduate school in places that had maybe 100,000. And so this was a small part of a city that was much, much larger than I'd ever lived in before. So that was a shock to the system. But I would say ExxonMobil, in many ways, was a great place to start a career. They did provide a lot of mentoring and training, and I think meaningful work to do. And so I started off, and they had a new hire rotation program, which they don't do quite the same anymore, but where you had an experience to spend about 8 months working on 3 different parts of the business. And so I started off working in a part of the business where I was learning exploration in Louisiana. So looking at deep gas opportunities offshore and kind of near shore on Louisiana. And then spent some time working a geophysics project, so learning gravity, magnetics, seismic acquisition, those sorts of things. And then spent another 8 months working on a injection project in Qatar. And so had opportunities to travel for each of those, really exciting work, meaningful work. And I think at that point I realized, academia was really interesting in many ways, but did not offer that same kind of actionable learnings and practical sort of applicability of the work that I was doing. And here it was directly applicable. You could see the results, and it made a difference. It made a difference for communities. It made a difference for industry. It made a difference for, life basically. And so it was attractive to continue there. So spent about 15 years at ExxonMobil doing primarily, doing geoscience, but about 5 years of that was in exploration, about 5 years in development, and then about 5 years in production company. Had roles where I was a, a planner, which in that kind of environment, I was supporting one of the vice presidents, but also learning how to do the planning and budget cycle, and then also like writing a lot of the material that went into like the annual report and the summary annual report, those materials that go out for investors, and learned about the kinds of accuracy and precision that's needed for any kind of communications that go out to investors for a publicly traded company, and had some experience presenting, at our annual meeting and, things like that. So had a lot of really interesting experiences from a business side and then also from a geoscience side while I was there.
It really sounds like ExxonMobil was able to really cultivate you technically. I'm a little curious about a comment you made. Moving to Houston, biggest place you've ever lived. How was that life balance transition for you? Um, was it a little scary at first, and it took a while? Did you have the same sort of resourcing to kind of help you work through that? Because that's a big transition.
It is, it is. And I think for myself, I'm pretty self-reliant. And so I didn't have any family that was here. I did have some kind of distant step relatives that were in the area, but didn't have any family that was here. And really none of my family had moved away from rural Virginia. So I was kind of the only one who was kind of outside of Virginia and in a different state and in a different career path. So I think I'm a kind of a self-reliant person, and so had utilize the skills that I had inside to be able to make that transition. But I would say that, at that time, there were also a lot of other folks that were entering the industry. So there was a really big community of others who were in their mid 20s who were moving to Houston and figuring out how the world works. And so there was a great peer group that I was able to connect with. And that was a great support network. I'm still connected with many of them today.
Fantastic. It's nice to have people to rely on, and someone who spent all that time out in Nowheresville, New Zealand. I'm sure even Houston was an easy transition, uh, comparatively. Um, but we already started. We said you work for Oxy. Obviously, you at some
Yeah.
point decided to transition from ExxonMobil, and I think when I first came across you, you were somewhere in between at Caliche, maybe,
Yeah.
when we first ran across each other. So, what's the goes through your mind, I think, to some degree when you're thinking of change, at least from one career. You talked about the excellent cultivation you had at Exxon, but there's other things out there. And so, how
Sure.
did you decide it was right for you to explore them?
Yeah, well, I'll say that one of the things that I did not realize going into the petroleum industry was how unstable in many ways it is, and how dependent businesses are upon oil price. And so in 2020, 2019, 2020, global pandemic happened, and oil price went to minus $40 a barrel. At that point, all companies were looking for ways to reduce headcount and cut costs, and ExxonMobil was no different there. And so I was supervising a team working West Africa, and West Africa became not as much of a priority. And so I found myself looking for a new role and had not continued to, or had not perhaps done a very good job of building external relationships, and realized, wow, I really should have built some more external relationships. But also, I wasn't kind of, again, sure what else was out there in terms of careers for geoscientists, because I had been very focused on supervisory manager work, exploration type scale work, international exploration at ExxonMobil. I had a great opportunity to be a mentor, what they called an executive in residence with Rice University. They have a number of different innovation programs and entrepreneurship programs, and one of those is their Clean Energy Accelerator. So I was mentoring early stage companies who were trying to build businesses. And so I didn't have any expertise in the early stage part of it, but I had lots of experience in how to communicate with businesses. And so that's what I could offer to those companies is, they would say, "Oh, I've had this term sheet in front of, ExxonMobil or Shell or Chevron for months now, and no one will get back to me," or, I can't understand why they won't sign. And I could have a lot of reasons why they're not signing. It's not the right budget cycle part of the year. You haven't talked to the right manager. I mean, all sorts of things that I could help offer some of those companies about how to progress their businesses, and then how to be organized and how to do timelines and planning and budgeting, all those sorts of skills that you learn, or I had learned through my work as supervisor, manager, planner. Um, so what I learned from that experience, what I learned from those companies though, was that wow, there is so much going on in the energy space. So many exciting things with hydrogen and geothermal and CCS and CCUS and a variety of other battery technologies, wind and solar. Had no idea that all of this was happening and that geologists and engineers were a part of it. And it was so exciting to see people who were so passionate about what they were doing. Many people in petroleum are maybe passionate at the beginning, but I think some of that passion wanes as you get to mid career or late career. And this was a group of folks who were, many of them themselves, mid or late career, but they were so excited and passionate about the work they were doing and committed to it. That really got me excited to see what else was out there for geologists. And as I started doing research and building a network to understand more about what was going on, I learned that CCS was a great opportunity to apply those same kind of subsurface skills to now a new type of geology, or a new discipline of geology, to, instead of producing fluids, injecting fluids. And so was fortunate to pivot then to Caliche Development Partners, where I was supporting projects in cavern storage and then also developing a CCS project for them. I soon learned how private equity works, which is that also a bit unstable, and had an opportunity to find a little bit more stability at Oxy, doing very exciting work and similar kinds of CO2 storage projects.
And I think you hit on something really interesting. And I don't think it's just in the energy space that you can say this. Whatever degree you get is probably far broader than you realize. I mean, if you would have told me I'd be doing what I'm doing now when I got my bachelor's of science in petroleum and natural gas engineering, I'd be like, that isn't even the same thing. And it's the energy space is dynamic even in a downturn, and sometimes more so in a downturn. It's really kind of interesting, and so we're glad you found a great place to land. um, couple questions as we're closing in. One is an easy one. It's probably no surprise based on your New Zealand experience and your love of the outdoors that you're a troop leader for Girl Scouts.
Correct. Yes.
And is this keep your toes out in the tundra, as it were, allow you to still go camping and all those fun things? What's the what do you take from that now? I mean, as a girl dad, I did it too, so to some degree, but still love the outdoors.
Yeah, so I was a Girl Scout growing up. My mother was a troop leader. My grandmother was a troop leader. So it was one of those things where there was a history of my family of, being involved in Girl Scouts. And I think what I liked about it was the ability to connect with the community. I think a lot of the activities I do are centered around building community. And then I really appreciated that perspective of developing girls and their ability to plan, organize, lead projects. Those are the same kind of skills that I've used throughout my career. So that kind of message of Girl Scouts really resonated with me, and I wanted to share that with my own daughters. And so I've been a troop leader now for 4, I guess, years. About 4 years or so. Troop leader, we've got about 30 girls in the troop. I'm also the cookie manager, which is basically a weekend part-time, but almost full-time on the weekend kind of job for cookie season. People, if you're in Houston, you should come buy cookies because we've got big sales goals here. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to be able to develop those skills. Girl Scouts also now is much more focused on STEM than perhaps they were when I was a Girl Scout. Much more focused on arts and crafts. Now it's very STEM focused, and so I'm able to bring those skills I have as a geologist to helping girls with badges that are in our meeting spaces, and then also helping them learn about the outdoors. For folks who've grown up in Houston, many of them have not really ever been outdoors. It's hot here. People sometimes don't get outdoors that much. I took a group over to the Houston Arboretum, which is very essentially located, and for some of the adults, it was their first time being there, in their mid 40s. So I think it's a great opportunity to help girls learn about the environment. We go camping 2 or 3 times a year, overnight, and then we've got camping events that we do for the day as well. So great opportunity to get girls outside, learn about their environment. Sometimes I try to we work in some geology lessons, and then a great opportunity to help build leadership and organizational skills.
It's fantastic, and I think too many people are just focused on the sweets, the cookies that come out of the Girl Scouts, but the leadership development
Yeah.
is unsung. I think, and I'm glad you're giving back. And I could go down, spend another half hour, and go down the list of all your volunteer activities, but I'd like to touch on one more, and that's you're also giving back to students. Could you tell us a little bit about the Imperial Barrel Award and competition and what that really is?
Sure. So I am involved in, yeah, a number of different APG organi parts of APG organization, both for the CCUS conference and Image, and then also for Imperial Barrel Award. What's special about Imperial Barrel Award is that Imperial Barrel Award rather is that it's a competition for graduate students, and I think this year also undergraduates, where they can have a real experience of having a data set, working through that data set to solve a geologic problem and come up with opportunities. And historically, that's been focused on oil and gas. For the past 2 years, this will be the third year, we have opened that competition up to CCS and to geothermal teams, or to teams working geothermal and CCS data sets. And so what I do for that program is to, one, offer educational sort of tutoring training for students who are participating, and then help to write some of the rules for how the competition's governed, and then also to judge some of the competitions as well. So kind of a number of different ways that I'm involved in the CCS part of that competition.
I really love that you give back, and I enjoyed doing it when I did it for the CO2 Evolve program.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
jobs happen and you
Sure.
run out of time. But
Yeah.
thank you for doing so and giving back. One last question before we close. What do you love about your job?
Yeah, so I really enjoy solving problems, I enjoy learning new things, and I enjoy integrating. I really like the part of my job, or I guess I like the parts of my job where I'm able to do some geoscience, but also some regulatory work, some public affairs work, and not that I'm doing those roles, but I'm relying on those individuals and relying on some of that information and collecting that together to help solve a problem. And so in CCS, it's about getting permits or certification for pore space so that we can inject CO2 and store it for a long time. And so it's about putting that technical work together with commercial work and land and regulatory work. Wrapping that all together is the thing that I enjoy, the integration of that to help solve a problem.
Fantastic. Carolyn, thank you so much for your time. I'd like to thank again you for taking time to come and join us today. I'd like to thank Ryan Kessler for producing this podcast. And until next week, thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to listen to new episodes of Stream of Consciousness, available on your preferred podcast listening station.